I support Proposition 1 because I think transit is critically important to the health of a city.
You don't raise taxes when there's a raging pandemic and people can't work.
Should voters renew a Seattle transit measure that expires this year? Supporters say Metro bus service is an important equity issue, but opponents argue that any additional sales tax during a recession is a bad idea.
Hand sanitizer and masks.
Transit activists are spreading the word about Proposition 1, the Seattle Transportation Benefit District, a $240 million measure on your ballot this November.
Citizens are feeling the strap.
Both sides weigh in.
1 out of every 3 essential workers counts on transit.
Should you support a sales tax bump to preserve bus access in Seattle? Tackling transit taxation, next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. If you think the 2020 election is all about the race for U.S. president, you're letting a critical local measure on transit pass you by. It's called Proposition 1, a renewal of a 6-year sales tax measure for added transportation options in the city of Seattle. This year's Transportation Benefit District proposal is actually less of a tax hit for voters than it was the first time around, and it's facing no organized opposition. But there are still voices of concern about how continuing this regressive tax will affect a region struggling to emerge from the economic crisis of COVID-19. Why is the Transit Riders Union campaigning for Proposition 1 for more Metro bus service and other improvements if there's no formal opposition? Lead organizer Matthew Lang says it's simple. If this measure fails, 150,000 service hours are on the chopping block.
Essential workers, low-income individuals, unhoused population, those people will be hit the hardest because they are reliant on transit.
Prop 1, officially known as the Seattle Transportation Benefit District, or STBD, passed with more than 62% voter approval in 2014. The measure included a $60 vehicle tab fee and a 0.1% sales tax increase to generate roughly $50 million a year. The money helped add more than 8,000 weekly trips to King County Metro, offered free ORCA passes to Seattle's public high school students, and put 70% of Seattle households within a walk of 10 minutes or less to transit.
Between 2015 and 2020 has been the best experience riding transit in Seattle that I've ever had.
Carla Saulter, better known on her blog as the Bus Chick, rides and writes about transit. Her family has not owned a car since 2003.
I support Proposition 1 because I think transit is critically important to the health of a city.
Yet while Saulter and many city leaders are strong in their support of the STBD, they're well aware in the grips of a COVID-19 economic downturn, it's not a great time to talk about taxes.
Transit is a lifeline for all of our communities.
After debate, the city landed on a 0.15% sales tax increase with the STBD renewal proposal, lower than the 0.2% maximum. And there are no car tab fees this time around. Tim Iman's voter-approved I-976 has tied that potential revenue up in the courts.
They're just pigs at the trough.
So, Prop 1, if approved in 2020, would collect $8 million fewer per year than the 2014 version. But some critics still aren't buying it.
You don't raise taxes when there's a raging pandemic and people can't work.
Cyril O. Miller is a disabled veteran on a fixed income who says if Prop 1 is approved, taxpayers like him would end up bearing the brunt of the STBD's sales tax burden, with COVID shutting down so much commerce in Seattle.
We're the ones who want to pay for it because you don't have the taxes coming in from the businesses that used to be downtown.
The city projects a 16% decrease in sales tax revenue for this year. And as of June, ridership on Metro is down 65 to 70% in the pandemic, with no clear road to recovery.
I don't think it's going to help us.
Prop 1 supporters say a small sales tax boost, an extra 15 cents per $100 spent, would have a big impact on improving transit for all, including those affected by the West Seattle Bridge closure. But this West Seattle resident isn't convinced.
Unless they're going to have a water taxi leaving every 5 minutes, we're not talking about helping to get more people into the city.
Miller is aware there's no organized campaign opposing Prop 1. You won't even see an argument against it in your voter's guide. But this 83-year-old and other critics say asking Seattle voters to save a metro system run by King County is simply not right.
It would be great if it was going to be a shared burden, but it's not going to be a shared burden.
But King County voters said no to a roads and transit measure in early 2014. And when the county council decided not to revisit the proposal in 2020, Seattle was left with a tough decision.
We don't tax correctly in our state, which has been the ongoing problem with transit service.
Saulter says our state, worst in the country when it comes to regressive taxation, forces cities and counties to rely on measures like Prop 1 and creates a dilemma for voters.
We're asking people to decide which is worse, taking away people's mobility or increasing the sales tax. And that's the difficult decision that we're in.
It's not difficult for Cyril O. Miller.
You're putting the burden on people who can't afford to pay it.
But he's one of very few voices against many in a vote over transit that makes a stop on your ballot this fall. And joining us to break this down, we have with us Alex Hudson. She is the Executive Director of Transportation Choices Coalition, speaking in favor of Prop 1, and Suzie Burke, a Seattle business leader who's speaking out against it. We had a virtual coin flip before the show, and Suzie, you are up first. Why do you oppose Proposition 1?
Well, Brian, once again, the citizens of Seattle are being asked to spend more money in a time that it's hard to spend more money on transportation alternatives, which are great to have transportation alternatives, but these are things that we're already, with our King County taxes, paying for, that would be Seattle dollars only going into King County Metro for something more. But we don't get to decide what in this mix is going to actually be bought with our dollars. Once again, more dollars, but we're getting less service. We're using less service. There's a big bragging point about this being for ORCA dollars for our children to ride the buses, but our children aren't even going to school right now. Right now, King County, City of Seattle, and Metro need to be using the dollars that they already get most efficiently. Citizens are feeling the strap, and it's important to not increase this now.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Alex, your response here. Why do you support this measure?
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the measure is and why we support it. So Proposition 1 for Seattle renews and modifies an existing tax. It is 0.15% sales tax, so 15 cents on every $1,000 that people will spend, which goes directly into transit service, targeted to enhance service throughout the city of Seattle, so transit service directly for Seattleites. It puts enhanced services to address the West Seattle transportation crisis, as folks are needing high-capacity transit to get in and out of West Seattle. It holds on to our really important affordability programs, as Suzie mentioned, for high school students and residents of Seattle Housing Authority. And it does this for 6 years. So while it might be true that our kids are doing school from home, that certainly is not going to be the long-term case. And then finally, it invests in transit capital dollars to make sure that transit is moving efficiently and reliably and predictably through the city of Seattle. We support this because it is critically important that we continue the transit service that people are relying on now and in the future. It is true that transit service and transit ridership is on the decline, but I think what we miss in emphasizing that is the fact that transit is absolutely an important part, an essential really part of people's prosperity in the city of Seattle. King County Metro is delivering 150,000 trips every single day, and Seattleites are really counting on this service.
Got it. Alex, though, I want to follow up on a point that Suzie made here earlier. This whole idea of asking people to pay for taxes for transit in the middle of the economic crisis brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when ridership is down. How do you answer that critique specifically?
I would say actually that, what we know from the analysis is that this will cost the average Seattle household $24 a year. So certainly, the cost of a single Uber ride for many people in order to produce 150,000 hours of transit service that Seattleites, hundreds of thousands are counting on every single day. This is an existing tax. This is not a new tax. And because of the loss of the vehicle license rate through Initiative 976, Seattleites are actually going to be getting a discount, paying less money than they were before.
Okay, and I want to dive into that car tab issue in just a minute, but Suzie, if I could, the flip side of this, and you've heard it already from Alex here, proponents are really saying this is a matter of equity. If you cut transit, you're cutting a vital service for essential workers and people who can really least afford it. I know the routes that are still running right now in the city all serve areas with higher percentages of people of color. How do you respond to that whole equity concern there?
Well, the real problem with the equity of raising the taxes for citizens inside Seattle and not for the rest of King County is that means our people of color, our people of a low income are going to pay more. And it also puts our small businesses at a problem with the rest of the county. It'll be cheaper for you to buy something in the county than to buy it in your little deli down the street. What's missing here is the fact that this is a King County service. We get 65% or so of what we pay for here inside the city, but we're already paying as county citizens the big sales tax, the big, actually some property tax is going for transportation. And this is a small amount that's just extracted from Seattle citizens. And we're already paying that 10 cents. So now it's 15. But the truth is it puts us at a disadvantage. And you'll notice that King County didn't ask their citizens to raise the tax in this bad COVID time.
Yeah, that county and city issue is one I'm going to delve into in a little bit later in this discussion. But Suzie, I wanted to make sure I talked about this one piece with regard to I-976, this car tab measure voters passed last year. It plays a pretty important role in this. I think this is one of those devils in the details types of discussion here. You've raised the concern, Suzie, that if the state Supreme Court does indeed overturn 976, and Tim Eyman really doesn't have a great track record with the state Supreme Court, but if that does happen, that could open the door for car tab fees, possibly other fees too, put in place by the Seattle City Council. What do you want people to know about that?
Well, I think it's a little duplicitous to hang our hat on, oh, you're getting a reduction because you, the citizens, voted to reduce car tabs. We did, not with any help from transportation choices. But the truth is this car tabs thing is still in this Prop 1. And if we get the chance to put it back, immediately, I believe the city council has said they'll put $20 more on the car tabs. And over a little bit of time, we'll put $60 more on the car tabs. And we, as the citizens voting on Prop 1, don't get another vote at that. We're stuck with this for 6 years. The city council itself thought we should only do this for 4 years because this tax hasn't always been with us. This tax, I believe, came in like 2014. But this should be thought about as an extra, and this extra is not necessary in the time of COVID.
Alex, I want to make sure that we try to dive into some of these details here. The concern about the possibility of additional fees for the future. I know the council could potentially act in a council-manic action, meaning no vote of the people here if they did indeed want to pass along that $20 car tab fee. If indeed 976 is overturned, there's a possibility for developer fees too that are allowed in this measure here. Can you break down some of those issues here, some of Suzie's concerns?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is that Seattle voters overwhelmingly, resoundingly rejected 976. It is simply not the case that voters in the city of Seattle voted in favor of passing 976. It's just right there in the numbers. I think to the matter of whether or not the council would take action, you should ask a Seattle City Council member about that.
Okay.
That would be a public discussion with our democratically elected representatives. I will note that the Seattle Transportation Benefit District, which is the piece that we're discussing here, does have independent citizen oversight through the Seattle Transportation Advisory Board, which citizens and residents of the city of Seattle are always welcome to apply for. It's a way to really make sure that we're checking and balancing that this service dollars are going appropriately. I just want to make one point here, which is that it is true that these are enhanced services above the baseline service that King County Metro provides. And we have led the nation in transit ridership growth. The results have been that 72% of Seattleites are within walking distance of frequent transit. This is levels of transit service that are extremely popular, that have created Seattle being the singular city really to see this level of ridership growth, and has led us to having an astounding level of access to opportunity for people. These are very popular programs that have produced important results that we want to keep.
Got it. And I know Prop 1 passed in 2014 with 62% of the vote too. So I did want to talk about this though, Alex. If Prop 1 is indeed renewed here, there's a concern that even with a yes vote, there will likely be continued cuts to our current metro service. And I'm saying this because this measure very simply does not bring in as much revenue as what we were talking about in 2014. The money would be spread out a little bit more too, going towards projects like more water taxis with the West Seattle Bridge still shut down. I wanted to talk about this whole concept of where would the money go?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's going directly into transit service in the same way that the original Prop 1 was going. We need to address the West Seattle transportation crisis and be able to get people off of that island or the peninsula, and also to make sure that there isn't massive traffic overflow in our southwest neighborhoods, South Park, Georgetown, and White Center, who already experience higher levels of preventable traffic violence and air pollution than other places. It maintains a really important affordability and access programs that thousands of children and seniors and low-income people are counting on, as transit is their lifeline. I'd like for us to remember that for many people, transit is not a choice, it is a need. Not everyone is able physically or financially to drive. And those residents, those taxpayers of the city of Seattle deserve to be prioritized and are counting on transit as the way that they can access opportunity. And then the third piece is, yes, it does go into some transit capital projects, which makes sure that we're not, that we're using our dollars most efficiently. So the question about King County Metro, it is absolutely true that declining ridership as a result of COVID, the underlying tax base, and increased costs have made it such that King County Metro is facing some really tough decisions. But that does not mean that the city of Seattle needs or wants to walk away from our vitally important and enhanced transit service.
Okay, I'm going to get back to that Metro Transit funding piece in just a second here, but Suzie, I wanted to make sure I touched on this. You brought this up earlier, and we just heard from Alex a second ago. This increased bus service is not the only piece of Prop 1 here. We're talking about these ORCA cards for high schoolers in the public school system in Seattle. We're talking about ORCA cards for Seattle Housing Authority residents, some low-income folks there. That we're also talking about some programs, study in particular, that's in place to measure how people of color could be served better by our transit system here. Those would be some big losses if people voted no. There's more to this than just bus service.
But they don't have to be. These are still choices that Metro makes, and the ORCA card, particularly into the housing people that gets used, is good for Metro, and it can be there now. We should not talk about this as this is going to be the only transit service we get is we vote yes or no on this. We already are paying a big piece of our sales tax as King County residents overall for an overall bus system. And I don't know about parts of Seattle, but I know Metro has not served Fremont more because of this transportation plan. We have to have a good bus service. We all support a good bus service, but that does not mean that the specific things that this piece of new transportation tax will pay for is justified at this time. And our citizens need to have our dollars looked at very carefully. The city council is cutting police. It's cutting all kinds of other things out of its budget, but taxing us more doesn't make a lot of sense.
Okay. Alex, I want to jump back to you, and I know you're not the budget director for Metro Transit, but there are some questions here with this. Metro received $244 million in federal aid with the CARES Act this year, that federal piece there, a big boost to its revenue forecast. The Washington Policy Center just recently put out a report about this that says essentially Metro doesn't need another 6 years of STBD taxes from Seattle to stay afloat. How do you respond to that?
I don't think the question is whether or not we want transit to stay afloat. I think it's whether or not we want transit to be good. 1 out of every 3 essential workers in the city of Seattle counts on transit. These are the people who, while we all are staying home, are making sure that our government, our healthcare, our grocery stores, et cetera, are open for our use. This is not a new tax. This is an existing tax that folks are already paying and the service that we're already enjoying. I think that walking away from low-income people, essential workers, children, elderly people is not in line with Seattle's values or frankly, what people are expecting from our society.
Got it. Suzie, back to you on this one. I've heard a lot of proponents of Proposition 1 that waiting around for more federal help, for example, is probably not a good plan, and waiting around for any reason would simply lead to more cuts in service if the TBD were not renewed here. This summer, for example, as you know, 200 Metro workers, those part-time workers, had to be laid off. Are you sympathetic to that, these concerns about losing service here potentially?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to us losing our police officers. I'm sympathetic to us losing people who should be cleaning up the streets. But Seattle has to make choices right now with dollars that are coming in from a finite group of citizens who can afford to live in the city. And it just bothers me that we are asked as citizens of just Seattle to sponsor more Metro cost, whether we get more services or not. Most of the services we're talking about, serving the low income, serving, essential workers and whatnot, are here because we're part of the big Metro system, which we are spending a lot of money on across the whole King County. And citizens in Seattle spend a bigger piece of that simply because we have more sales tax. To raise our sales tax, which is hard on our small businesses, it's hard on the people who have to pay it because they're here, to do something more. And by the way, I'd like to see what the city council and Metro promise to do with this money. Because when I look at this, it's a whole laundry list of things that could happen. But the citizens of Seattle have been shocked before about how many things go into a initiative or a Prop 1 that don't actually happen.
I know that's going to be part of the public budget process that's coming up here through October and November. Thank you for bringing that up. But Alex, let's try to engage that bigger picture issue here. This very interesting dynamic with Prop 1 when city voters have such a strong impact on county resources with King County Metro here. When this county measure failed in 2014, that's basically when the STB came to life here. But there was an understanding that the county would somehow come back later on. That didn't happen earlier this year. I'm trying to figure out if you have any confidence that this could be a county-wide measure anytime in the near future.
I am confident, and I think that you don't have to necessarily ask me. You can read the commitment and intention letter that was sent by the King County Council President, Claudia Balducci, that was co-signed by King County Executive Dow Constantine, as well as a symmetrical commitment from the Seattle City Council in a resolution saying that we all know what we want is a region-wide and a county-wide system. And that is because we operate as a region here. But that doesn't mean that the city of Seattle should walk away from investments that people are counting on. So yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Suzie, we're starting to get close to the end of the show here, but just this whole idea of the future of transportation funding here, I hear you calling for a county-wide measure, but county-wide voters have not supported that. So how do we move forward there in looking for that bigger picture county funding to something like this?
maybe we need to listen to the people and produce something that they do want to support. I'll just tell you a grab bag of things that then you get to watch the county, the metro executives or somebody else decide what you should or should not have is not real palatable. Not when you're coming up with new money. It's one thing to be sponsoring this overall system, which we've been sponsoring for years. I rode the former city buses when I was a kid with a token on a chain around my neck. We've been giving kids free rides. In fact, I did a pilot project to show how free rides for all kids in the Fremont area that go to BF Day school would have been productive for Metro. They turned it down. No, these are great ideas, but the money needs to come from the overall users of the system, the overall King County. And by the way, our city council kind of said the same thing before they took the vote to put this on the ballot.
I know a lot of different talk about this. Time to wrap up the show here. Suzie, final thoughts for voters when it comes to Prop 1, the STBD coming on the ballot this fall. Give you a minute.
Vote no on Prop 1 and do it so that we can actually go back and come up with a program that makes more sense for King County Metro in a time of COVID where we're trying to keep costs down, be efficient, and help our citizens in their own places to not have more expenses.
Got it. Alex, I can give you the last word here. Go right ahead.
Say vote yes to renew an existing program and tax that has resulted in really astounding benefits for the people of the city of Seattle. 1 out of every 3 essential workers counts on transit. Walking away from essential workers, from low-income people, from the elderly, from children is simply not in line with Seattle values. We know exactly what this measure is going to. It's going to transit service, affordability programs, and capital investments. You can look that up in the legislation and the independent citizen oversight that makes sure that that's what's happened. I would encourage people to really show up for their neighbors who are right now really counting on transit every day to get to where they need to go.
Okay. Thank you both for your input on this, and we will be right back. What are people saying about the Seattle Transportation Benefit District online? One commenter says, no new taxes. There is massive unemployment. Another says, a pandemic increases the need for a robust STBD. Essential workers rely on transit. We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Coming up next week, the gubernatorial race in Washington. Governor Jay Inslee is seeking a 3rd term and will face Republican challenger Lauren Culp this November. We hear from both candidates, plus the heads of the state Democratic and Republican parties. That's next week on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.